Thank you for joining us for this recorded web briefing from the National Archives and Records Administration. In this webinar, Lynn Stewart and Tim Ennis give an in-depth tutorial on how to submit your transfer request in ERA. Let's join the session.
Thank you very much, Paulette. I hope everybody can hear me okay. And I'm hoping that Paulette, yes, good. And please type a note into chat if for some reason you're getting an audio problem or if we start fading away here. I'm Lynn Stewart. I am the lead for the Annual Move Coordinating Group of the National Archives and Records Administration. And we are, of course, the folks that oversee and literally coordinate annual move activity across NARA. And this is a group of folks who come from a number of different parts of NARA's organization, and it's very, very cross-organizational within NARA. And we really are interested in providing you with the best information we can about how you can use ERA for the FRC annual move. Tim?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Ennis. I supervise the textual accessioning section in the Washington, D.C. area, which includes accessioning into the Archives 1 and Archives 2 buildings in the D.C. area. And I am also a member of the cross-organizational team Lynn just described.
Thank you, Tim. We really appreciate your participation today, as Paulette's already said, on this topic of using the electronic records archives to transfer your agency's permanent records that are stored in federal record centers to the legal custody of the National Archives. Let me mention right now, just in case the whole term transfer, which can be very confusing because it has many different meanings within our whole universe of records management and archives. Today we're talking about transferring records that are already in the FRCs, the Federal Record Centers, that already are determined to be permanent records into the legal custody of the National Archives. We are not going to be talking at all about transferring agency records to Federal Record Centers for storage. They're already there, and these are permanent records, so we're talking about legal transfer today. This presentation is an overview of what you will see when you work with the transfer requests that are created in ERA for the annual move. The annual move is a short term that we simply use to talk about an entire disposition year cycle, a process which actually occurs throughout every year, every calendar year, every fiscal year. There are usually 2 or 3 quote-unquote annual moves in different stages going on at any given moment, both for the National Archives and for your agencies. I hope you all had an opportunity to do the online ERA training, which is at archives.gov, for transferring records. Lessons 1 and 2 are the most pertinent. Review the ERA agency user manual. There are also some brand new video training aids available. I mean, I really mean brand new. Some of them have only been up for a matter of a couple of weeks. Those include 5 short video FAQs that are on the topic of using ERA to transfer records to NARA. These are fairly brief. They run from a little under 2 minutes to, I think the longest one is about 4.5 minutes. They're very, very, very nice. And there's also a video of live instructor training from the ERA boot camp on transferring records in ERA, which runs a little over an hour. And another of our colleagues, Dawn Sherman-Fells, did that training, and she does an excellent job, so I very much encourage you all to take a look at that video as well. It's not specific to annual move, but gives you lots of wonderful information about transferring permanent records. For 2016, NARA loaded 12,207 transfer requests into ERA on behalf of agencies for permanent records stored in the Federal Record Centers. Our practice is to include the upcoming eligibility year, which is 2016, as well as including transfers with disposition dates in the FRCs that are overdue. This year we included, not just 2016, of course, but 2011, 2006, 2001, and 1996. This follows our current practice of including overdue permanent records in 5-year increments. In addition, in this year in particular, there are 225 transfers that were more than 20 years overdue for transfer to the National Archives that were identified as part of a NARA project. So in addition to the 2016 stuff and the 5-year increments going back to 1996, we do have some additional records that are going to appear as transfer requests that have been overdue for quite some time. And we're hoping that agencies will go ahead and act on those for us. This over 1,200 transfer requests that we just loaded on the 1st of October represent 177,873.8 cubic feet of records. That's a lot of permanent records that the agencies have created that are included in this year's annual move. These include records that are currently stored in 13 separate federal record centers and involve 19 different NARA archival units. Some quick review about basics about FRC transfers in ERA. The draft, these are transfer requests in draft for your action, and they are based on eligible FRC transfers. NARA creates these on behalf of the agencies from information and data derived from ARCUS, which is the FRC operating system, as well as from ERA record schedule information as well. One FRC ARCUS transfer becomes one ERA transfer request, or TR, including the fact that if you have an older or an FRC transfer that has been broken out, split for some reason, that becomes a separate record in ARCUS. So every separate ARCUS record becomes a separate TR. Agencies are responsible for reviewing, updating, and proposing those transfer requests to NARA. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to literally do a field-by-field review of what you're going to see when you look at those draft TRs in ERA. If there is information which needs to be corrected, that information needs to be corrected in ERA, and the FRC, the pertinent FRC, does need to be notified. ERA will not provide automatic update information back to the FRCs. Every agency has already received advanced list of the candidate FRC transfers for 2016, which contain the pertinent ARCUS data, from which we derive the data we put into ERA. Here's a very simple and very, very high level, you want to call it that, that's probably exaggerating its sophistication. Many of you have already seen this, but this is a reminder of the basic sequence of how the process flows when you're doing an FRC annual move transfer in ERA. First thing that happens in the red boxes, NARA creates a draft TR from ARCUS data and other ERA data in ERA for you. That piece we do on your behalf. Second and third steps belong to you and the agencies. You need to review, update the TR, then the transferring agency official, which is a basic role in transfer in ERA, submits that particular transfer request that's currently in a draft status to the agency approving official. So the transferring official in the agency needs to submit it to the agency approving official, and the agency approving official will take it from there. Then the TR is moved from a status of submitted for agency approval to proposed. Submitted, proposed, basically the same thing, by your agency to the National Archives. By then, we're at box 4. NARA archival units receive these transfer requests. They review them, accept the proposed transfer, or reject it if sometimes there's information that needs to be added, or sometimes there's an error, or sometimes there's a problem with the records. And if it is rejected, then it goes back to draft with an explanation in the rejection comment field. If the transfer request that's been proposed to NARA is accepted, it removes from being proposed to being approved. At that point, the Federal Records Centers and the archival units work together to move the records. We're in box 5. That's a NARA action and FRC action combined with archival units. At that point, we're back to box 6. In blue, you'll see actions taken specifically by NARA archival units. NARA completes our own internal processes. We will accept physical custody if that's the appropriate thing to do, and accept legal custody at box 8. Once again, a reminder, 1 TR is going to be created for every FRC transfer record in Argus. That's how that works. And again, very, very high level. And of course, it doesn't include any of the steps that you take in the agencies to do your own internal review, nor does it include NARA's internal processes for review either. Tim, would you like to talk about finding your annual move transfer requests in ERA?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Lynn. As Lynn described a moment ago, the ERA system was loaded with just over 12,000 transfer forms a few weeks ago, and there's a lot of transfer documentation in the system. A key for effectively processing the sort of the workflow Lynn previously described is finding the transfer forms. And the ERA system is equipped with basic and advanced search, which facilitates search and retrieval options. I will next walk through a basic search. When searching for annual move transfer forms, the first step is to log into the ERA system as the transferring agency official. When logging into the system, the user that's logging in must have the transfer agency official as one of the roles assigned to their account. There is not a separate login for each role. Rather, the roles are tied to the user form that's submitted initially. So that's a key. When the user submitted the form requesting the account, the form needed to include transferring agency official in order to effect this step. So that's the first step, logging into the system. And then, subsequently, conducting an advanced search. An advanced search will enable the user to search a variety of keywords or other specific fields for specific transfer forms. This is a key when searching the ERA system to ensure that the forms that are being returned or retrieved from the system are specific to the annual move. When conducting the advanced search, the business object that needs to be searched is the transfer request. A business object is a term that's unique to the ERA system, which in effect in this context means the form. The ERA is used for both scheduling and transfer activities, and as such, there are several forms that agencies may use when completing the scheduling and transfer process. For this purpose, for the annual move, the business object or form that needs to be searched is the transfer request. The next step would be inputting the keyword 2016 annual move, searching for draft status, and the 4-digit record group. This is a screenshot of the advanced search screen I just described. And as you can see, the keyword includes This would be the 2016 annual move, the record group. You can see the highlighted box on the right includes the different statuses. As Lynn previously noted, these forms are loaded into the ERA system in draft status. In narrowing the search in these key areas, this will help ensure that the results that are returned are the results for this year's annual move. When applying the search criteria and selecting the search button, search results will display, which would appear similar to that which is being displayed on the screen currently. As you can see, these search results include a listing of transfer request numbers. The first column on the left is the TR number. This is the hyperlink to the form, which can be selected to retrieve the form. In a moment, Lynn will walk through the form in more detail and include screenshots which display the form. And in advance of that, the mechanism for accessing that would be selecting the TR number. And when selecting this hyperlink, the system will ask you if you would like to view the form, or there's a couple of other options which may not be pertinent to this exercise. But again, the search results will include the transfer request number, which is a hyperlink and takes you to the form. Will also include several other pieces of information or pieces of metadata which would relate to the transfer form. This includes the ERA-generated transfer request ID, which I just covered, the ERA disposition authority, the FRC transfer number, which, as Lynn previously mentioned, is a one-to-one link with the FRC transfer number in the ARCIS system, among other fields. One thing I would like to note, unless you have the role for your agency of transferring agency official, do not save the TRs in ERA. Opening the TR associated with that specific will associate that specific TR with the user's information in the Contact Information tab. And subsequently, later in this presentation, you will see the Contact Information tab. But I think an element to note now is opening each of these transfer requests, opening a transfer request that's searched on would auto-populate or generate contact information. When searching for transfer forms, in some instances, stratified billing from the ARCIS system is included in the transfer group description field. As highlighted here, you can see the stratified billing code for NASA transfer. Includes a caret with a coding subsequent to the caret, which can be used in some instances for customer agencies that have implemented stratified billing for further segregating transfer forms. This is an example of NASA charge code description for Goddard Space Flight Center. Now, once you have submitted a search for a specific criteria, once you've submitted a search for a specific search criteria, you can certainly view the list of transfer requests, and the ERA user interface is displayed here. As you can see, the user interface is set up to default to 10 forms per page. And in addition to that, you may also export the data from the ERA system to an Excel file format, and that action may be completed through either downloading a full search result or downloading brief search results. You'll see on the screen highlighted on the upper right corner is these two options. Downloading the full search results will produce an Excel file, multi-tab Excel file, which will include all of the content from the ERA transfer form from the tabs, the General Information tab, the Transfer Details, the Contact Information, Signatory tab. It will also include workflow events, which in effect would be all of the signatures including the date timestamps and the individuals that signed the forms. Also, the brief search results also is a search option, and this includes a smaller subset of fields. The brief download includes 44 fields, including status, ERA disposition authority, FRC transfer number, volume, inclusive date, records type, box numbers, transfer group description, access and use restrictions, and dates of the fields. As we walk through the fields, you will see many of these in subsequent slides. When downloading search results, especially the full download, please keep in mind that downloading hundreds or thousands of records could take several minutes. Be sure to limit your search criteria for those records you actually need. You can see Appendix H in the user manual for search instructions and examples, and for tables which explore these options further. Okay, I will hand this to Lynn for additional information about the transfer form itself.
Great. Thank you very much, Tim, for walking us through a number of the basic strategies for finding your transfer requests in ERA. Sometimes that's a very basic thing. You know they're there, but you're not quite sure how to get at them the first time. So thank you very much for that information. We are actually going to talk about each of the tabs in the transfer request form. Again, what we're going to be seeing is examples of data as it's just been loaded in the draft status. There are general information tabs, transfer details, contact information tabs, signatory information, related assets, and attachments. And we're going to talk somewhat about all of them. So everybody brace yourself. At the very top of the first tab, what we have is the general information section of the general information tab. At the very top of the form itself, you will find the transfer request number, TR-record 4-digit record group number, followed by the fiscal year in which the transfer request was created in ERA, and the last 4 digits are simply sequential numbers that the system assigns the order in which the transfer request was created. But this is definitely a fiscal year date system, so that the center date there is going to be the fiscal year it was created, not the calendar year. You will also see right across from that, toward the upper right on your form, is the status. This, of course, is in draft, but whatever status it happens to be in that applies to the materials that you are looking at, the TR that you're looking at, will display there as well, whether it's submitted for agency approval, in proposed status, approved status, etc., and so forth. So, in the General Information tab, the very first piece of information is the Disposition Authority number. This is really the concrete basis for the creation of any transfer request in ERA. It must have a disposition authority which exists in ERA on the schedule side. This is an ERA system generated ID number for the disposition authority. For born in ERA record schedules, this number will begin with DAA. If you want to think of that as disposition authority agency, that's a fairly good mnemonic. For record schedules that were approved previously, not born in ERA, the system number will begin with a DAL, disposition authority legacy. This does not mean that the legacy does not mean that this is an invalid authority. This must be a valid disposition authority. This will correspond to the SF-115 item number of the actual authority. Later down on this same tab, we'll take a look, and you will be able to see the legacy disposition authority number, which will be the SF-115 and SF-115 item that is the foundation for this DAL number. Keep in mind that the DAL numbers are simply, again, system-generated numbers. When this legacy schedule information is entered into ERA by NARA staff, NARA staff does this. Agency staff does not. You do not need to enter existing disposition authorities based on SF-115 information into ERA. We will do that for you, and we'll touch on how you get that done in a minute. The number will correspond with the record group that corresponds with that 115, but the rest of the number, again, is just a kind of a dumb number. The year will reflect the year in which that information was entered into ERA. It will not be the year that the 115 was approved. And the final 4 digits, again, they're simply system sequential numbers. So it really is important to know what DAL number matches up with what legacy 115 number. And again, that will appear on the initial tab, the front tab, the general information tab, and we'll look at that in just a second. When we create these for you, you will notice that you have the agency or establishment will already be there for you. The record group and its number and name will already be there for you. You will notice that something over on the right-hand side, electronic legacy data, does not apply to anything that we're doing in the annual move, so that will always be known and it will always be grayed out. However, beneath the record group, you will see a couple of fields that you can indeed give us useful information. One is major subdivision, and the other is minor subdivision. You may enter data about these two entities, the major subdivision and the minor subdivision, of the part of your agency that created the records. We do not want to know what part of the agency you work for. We don't want to know your records management major and minor subdivision. We want to know if you're sure about the information, if you're sure this is correct, the major and minor subdivision of the unit that created the records. If you don't know that, simply leave it blank. This is not a required field. It's great to have, but it is not by any means required, and please enter it only if you know for sure what that information is. A little further down on the same tab, this is a long tab, like transfer details. Both general information and transfer details seem to go on forever. A little below the disposition authority information, a little above, is going to be the transfer group description. That's a really long and rather convoluted way of saying this is just a free text field that tells everybody, you, NARA, of what's in that group of records. What we have loaded into ERA on your behalf is the series description, the content of the series description field in ARCIS. And that varied over the decades from the old NARS 5 legacy data that dates back to the 1970s, and the more recent information from the ARCIS system for agencies that do take advantage of the Federal Records Center program's stratified billing system. The charge code description that you have provided that goes with your stratified billing charge codes will also be added into there. Tim showed you an example of a search that included a NASA TR, and the information from the old NARS 5 system for the series description was in there, but it also had the description that was provided by the agency for that charge code. So it also said Goddard Space Flight Center. So if somebody in your agency is looking for something and you're a stratified billing customer, you need to be familiar with what your charge code descriptions are, because you can search the text of those descriptions, and that will help you sort through your transfer requests. If you're a relatively small agency, this may not be an issue for you, but if you're a large agency, this can be a real lifesaver. For example, with the case of NASA, sometimes they have thousands of transfer requests in a single annual move. They really need to know whether it's Goddard or Langley or Jet Propulsion Lab or Kennedy Space Flight Center or Houston. So if you are one of those folks who use that option in the FRC, please familiarize yourself with these because it can really, really help you out. In this same section, again, you will see the Legacy Disposition Authority number. Again, a very fancy term, a little awkward perhaps, but what that is the underlying 115 and 115 item number that actually indicate that these records are permanent and it's the authority on which the transfer is based. The type of legal transfer for these kinds of records that we're talking about is always going to be the annual FRC move. Please do not change that. Also, grayed out should always say security scan no, because none of these records are electronic and being conveyed electronically. The transaction number type is actually quite important for agencies and for NARA because it indicates that this is indeed a record center transfer number, and the transaction number, in this case I believe it's the transaction number from the Washington National Records Center, that will appear in ERA exactly as it appears in ARCUS. So you will be able to match up your ARCUS transfer numbers with your the information in your transfer request in ERA because those two numbers match precisely. Again, don't mess around with that number because if you change so much as the dash in it, it's no longer going to match. Moving further down the tab, the record schedule item title. This is literally the title of that item, of that disposition authority item from the original Standard Form 115 or the Born in ERA record schedule. That's exactly where it comes from. If it looks like something odd and says something like paper copies, that's because that's exactly what the title of that particular item is. Inclusive dates, something that we would like you to pay attention to. It gives us the beginning date of the records as well as the end date. We're not looking for the bulk information here. We're looking for the earliest and latest. That's why it says inclusive. This is information we derive from the Standard Forms 135 that you provided to the Federal Record Centers at the time you transfer the information. So this is what's in ARCUS, and that's what we have put into ERA for you. If you feel that that needs correcting, you may correct it here, but you also need to let the FRCs know. Now, we're beginning to get to some real nitty-gritty here because we're beginning to get to the access restrictions section of the General Information tab. I'm going to go over this for a few minutes, and then I think that we're going to ask Paulette to read us back the question that we had earlier about a very specific question about how to fill this out for confidential business information. The access restrictions section, keep in mind that this is extremely important information. Often the information here may indicate that these records are national security classified or contain personally identifiable information. But the point of access restrictions is just that. These are restrictions that you have on records and who may access them, who may see them in the first place. Again, this is very important and it's a very critical section. We derive all the information that we can from what is in ARCUS, but that is not necessarily every piece of information the National Archives use in order to transfer those records. Let me point out to you that one of our brand new video FAQs, I believe it's the second one on how do I identify access restrictions such as FOIA exemptions on a transfer request in ERA. Again, it's not very long, but it's a very useful little few minutes of your life, and it's now available. The information, again, we have in ARCIS, we may have partial information, but we may not have complete information. In order to edit a field, you need to click on the ellipsis. I'm going to show you one of these in just a minute. Even though these boxes here, specific access restriction, security classification, statutory citation, and special marking appear to be gray, which normally means you can't edit them, you can edit them. And so the gray background does not mean anything. You may click on the ellipsis and you will see a pull-down list. You may make more than one selection. That is true of both the specific access restriction, the security classification, the statutory citation, and the special marking fields. All of those have pull-down menus, which appear when you click on the ellipsis. If at any point in any of those fields you choose other, the access restriction note down here, which is a free text field, becomes required. So if you're going to tell us none of these things in the pull-down list apply except other, you will need to explain to us fairly precisely what the access restrictions are. The default for anything that we note in based on ARCIS data that might have any kind of access restriction information at all indicated is going to be restricted fully. So look at that, and you need to determine within your agency whether or not that continues to be an accurate description. However, if the records contain national security classified information, we will expect your access restriction status to remain restricted fully. This is a blow-up of the specific access restriction field. Again, you can see that. The specific access restriction you can see better now, and the specific access restriction information. Paulette, if you can make this a little smaller, then people can see the other red box, which is around the pick list. Right. I don't know if you can make that bigger or not. You do see that in this particular instance, we're using an example of materials that are national security classified, and the FOIA that you need to choose in this case, oh, I beg your pardon, is not national security. It's personal information. I apologize, folks. So all of the FOIA exemptions are listed. If the records, when you have them, are under these FOIA exemptions, you need to tell us which one. In order to choose more than one, you simply use Control and click. If you need to tell us about more than one FOIA or other kind of specific access restriction, push down Control and then choose the correct ones. Then you use your little green button here to move it from this side to that side, and come down here and click Confirm, and that the revised information will appear in the appropriate box. A couple of other things here. While I'm thinking about national security classified information, as you know, if the records are or were national security classified, you will also need to attach to your transfer request NARA Form 14130, Classified Records Transfer Checklist. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but if you're indicating that these were or are classified or contain classified records, national security classified, you will need to do that. Another important point, if the national security classification level that you are aware applies to the highest level in this group of records, if that, for instance, is top secret, and what we're displaying on the transfer request is secret, if what the real classification level of the records is higher than what we have on the transfer request, contact the Federal Records Center in which these records are stored immediately, because that means they do not have the information from you that they need in order to properly safeguard those records. If they think they're confidential and they're actually top secret, they need to know that. Then they need to know that now. Okay. Oh, by the way, there's another video FAQ, one of the new ones. Number 3 is on the topic, how to identify classified records on a transfer request in ERA. So, that talks about the checklist. Let's take a second. Paula, can you read our question on business confidential information that we received right at the beginning of the webinar, please?
So Ann asked, could you please address this question during the webinar? We have been advised that for confidential business information, we should select FOIA B4 option for access restriction. And we should select the unrestricted option for use restriction, because if NARA receives a request for records, NARA would research the records and redact the CBI. Once redacted, the use of the records is unrestricted. My question is, how does NARA know which information in the records is CBI in order to redact it?
I'm going to refer that question to Tim, who works with these records more intimately on this situation than I do.
Thank you, Lynn. If I could provide a bit of context in applying access restrictions to transfer forms. First, the transfer form, this section of the transfer form is a mechanism for agencies to identify the access restrictions that agencies would apply to holdings based on the FOIA. Now, when updating transfer forms, I would suggest agencies consult with FOIA officers regarding appropriate access restrictions and apply access restrictions as appropriate, update the transfer forms as appropriate. And the examples described, B4 trade secret may be appropriate in that situation, and that certainly should be cited on the transfer form, and the transfer form should be updated to restricted fully status. Trade secret may be appropriate for CBI. By way of example, KFC's secret recipe, which I think everyone would like to get their hands on, if that appeared in federal records that were being transferred to the National Archives, that's certainly something that would need to surface during the transfer process. But there may be other instances where internal, deliberative, or pre-decisional information is in the records, for which there would no longer be access restrictions. It's important to consult with FOIA officers, and if there are any questions about access, to contact NARA early during the transfer process. Records which are offered to the National Archives are inactive historical files for which continued business need typically is ceased, or I should say has ceased, and deliberative matters should be resolved, and records would typically not include pre-decisional information. It's also important to note that NARA applies access decisions based on its access policies. So if there is an instance where there's specific content which the agency feels needs to be restricted once the records transfer to NARA's legal custody, it's important to note that in detail on the transfer documentation. And if there are any, if there are any further questions, I would encourage agencies to contact NARA through the annual move inbox, email inbox, which Lynn will provide at the end of this brief.
Thank you very much, Tim. Ann, did that help? We're also very happy, as Tim said, we are going to give you the annual move mailbox address if you don't already have it. We've been using it for several years. Please, when you have detailed questions about that kind of thing, get in touch with us, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. and try to make sure that those questions are routed to the appropriate people in the National Archives. So we'll talk more about that later. Back in the whole classified records arena, I did want to mention again that the National Archives Form 14130 is a requirement now. We do need to have that for classified or formally classified records. It's readily available on the archives.gov website. The National Declassification Center is available to discuss that with you and how it's properly used. Do keep in mind that every transfer request in ERA that needs a classified records checklist needs a separate one. Please do not list multiple TR numbers or FRC transfer numbers on a single classified records checklist. You need one checklist addressing one particular set of records transfer for each transfer request. This is just a quick screenshot of the top part of that particular checklist. It's a single page. It may require that you add additional information, supporting information on it, but I don't know if you can see it at this range in this kind of display, but it literally has names of National Declassification Center staff and their phone numbers. So I encourage you to get in touch with either Don McElwain or David Mengel if you have questions about how to use this form, how to fill it out, and what your obligations are for declassification review. Next section on the access restrictions tab. Again, this is one of the most complicated pieces of the entire form, and it's some of the most, as I said repeatedly, most complicated and most important parts. If there is an indication in the ARCIS data that there is some Privacy Act information in the records, for whatever reason, perhaps that was noted on the 135 or something else may have triggered that piece of information. If that's in ARCIS, this information that we're loading into ERA will say Privacy Act notice number. It's a yes-no field. It will say yes. If that information is incorrect and there is no Privacy Act information or personal information in those records, you can change that back to no. However, if there is Privacy Act information, if these records are part of an agency system of records under the Privacy Act, you must use the three accompanying fields, the agency system number, I think that's sometimes called the SORN, the Federal Register volume, that's another field, and the Federal Register page number in which that Privacy Act System of Records notice was published in the Federal Register. You do not have to attach a copy of the notice itself. You just need to tell us what the notice number is and what its Federal Register volume and page number are. Again, those are free text fields. We have no information about specific Privacy Act specifics in ARCIS, so you're going to have to fill that out yourself. Okay, moving along to use restrictions. Now this is a little different from the old paper standard form 258 legal transfer forms. Virtually everything we've talked about up to this point, the basic information was also required to be provided with the standard form 258 paper transfer forms. This is a little different. This is asking about use restrictions, not access, not who can see the records, but how the information or images perhaps, and often it is about images, may be used. There's nothing in ARCIS that gives us any data of any kind about any possible access restrictions. So you really need to know this about your own records, and you guys are the experts on your own records. Use restriction refers to things like copyright restrictions, donor restrictions, less applicable in the case of annual move records, but sometimes does come up. There may be trademark material, and there may be other restrictions on how the records may be reproduced by researchers. Not accessed by researchers, but reproduced. If you select anything other than unrestricted in the use restriction note, and you will see that the default we've provided you is undetermined because we don't know, then you are required to put some kind of a note into the use restriction note so that we know what the the use restriction, now I'm doing it, the use restriction is. One example of this would be copyrighted photographs. A number of us may have case files or other kinds of permanent records that contain photographs that were not taken by federal employees, so they're not in the public domain. These may remain the copyrighted property of the photographer, the non-federal photographer who took them in the first place. That means there will be restrictions probably on who may reproduce that particular photograph. Another example, and this is within the federal sort of realm, one of the few cases of this I know about, images of Smokey Bear are trademarked. I guess you could call it trademark. That's the closest thing I could come. They are protected from reproduction by act of Congress. They are legally restricted from reproduction by federal law. One of the very, very few cases I know of. The federal government has patents, the federal government has other kinds of things, but I know of almost no copyright or trademark things associated with the federal government, but this is one of them. Smokey Bear images cannot be reproduced by the public. So that's an example of what we're talking about when we talk about use restrictions. And considering the examples I just gave you, usually this is going to come up in the case of special media. Photographs, still photographs, moving images, sound perhaps, sound recordings, and maybe some other kinds. But it's also possible that you may have some of these kinds of materials included with what are primarily textual records. Okay, we're finally getting to the bottom of this tab. Last section is records type, and this is a general records type. I think there are only about 8 options here. In ARCIS, we have one field that tells us basically what kind of general records type we have, but it's not necessarily very descriptive. Often in ARCIS and in the previous NARS 5 system, the most vulnerable type of record in terms of conservation and preservation might be listed rather than the predominant media type. So if these are basically textual records, but you know there are tons of photographs in them, you may update this field as you would have some of the other fields above with the access restrictions. Again, you can simply click on the ellipsis, hold down Control, and either correct this or choose more than one option. And we do encourage you to do that if you know what the correct information for that is, or if you know if there are multiple general record types there. Now, we're finally to the bottom of the General Information tab. Paulette, do we want to pause to see if anybody has any chat questions at this point? While people are thinking about that or maybe typing into chat, let me just caution you, which is a very good way of proceeding when you're doing filling in internet forms of any kind, professionally or personally, you really want to save at the bottom of each tab. It's not a requirement by the system, but if you've reviewed a whole bunch of information, maybe tweaked some of it, you do not want to run the risk of losing it. So if you're working on this, you're the transferring official for your agency, this is what you're working on, you want to save this information, go ahead and save at the bottom of that tab. In the meantime, Paulette, do we have any chat questions?
We do have a couple of chat questions I've been keeping an eye on. From Tommy Lee, he asked, are you talking about SORN, S-O-R-N? And I think you were on slide 17.
Yes. When we're talking about Privacy Act, yes. SORN, S-O-R-N, is the acronym usually used for System of Records Notice, which would be followed by a number. Did I get that right, Tim? Okay. So the number that we're asking you for in the agency system number field is indeed the SORN, followed by where that notice was published in the Federal Register. That is how a system of records number or a system of records covered by the Privacy Act is established. It has to be published as such in the Federal Register. So we're asking for the SORN number and the publication information in the Federal Register. And if I remember correctly, most SORN notices probably would include that. Is that right? Maybe not. But it's information that should be available to you and to your FOIA folks.
Okay. I have a question. I'm going to go back up to the top where we had a couple of questions. Derek asked, if you transfer the TR in ERA, will it disappear in ARCIS?
No, it will not. The ARCIS information will be appropriately updated at the appropriate time, depending on what happens with the transfer request. Sometimes these are updated in mass, sometimes they're done individually. The Federal Records Center program is working in the direction of making sure that FRC transfers that have annual move transfer requests in ERA created move into a status of accession generated. That may not, they will not happen instantly on the 1st of October when we load them. But unless when the records are proposed in ERA, the archival units are going to review them, they're going to make a decision about whether they approve them, and so on and so forth. Even when the records are transferred legally, your ARCIS record will remain there, and it will indicate that those records, the status of those records will be updated to accession. And that's after all of the processes in ERA and in ARCIS are completed. So accessioned records do not disappear from ARCIS. There may be a little time lag in terms of ERA is updated to a specific status. That may or may not be an appropriate process trigger. There aren't any automatic triggers. Process trigger for the FRC folks to update the ARCIS record to a new status, but eventually for accession records, both in ERA, you will have legal custody accepted, and in ARCIS, you will have a status of accession.
So Michelle asked, she said that she's within her organization, she's the records manager. They call her an RML. And she reports to the command's records manager. What level is the training that we're currently doing for? Is it for the end user or for the command?
Okay, that depends entirely on how your agency organizes access to ERA. This is for folks who are actively working in ERA on transfer requests. If you do not have any responsibilities in ERA to evaluate these transfer requests or approve them or track them, then this is probably not relevant for you. That may be a conversation you'll want to have with your senior records officers. Those are decisions made agency by agency, and that depends entirely on the agency records officer decisions about who should have what roles in ERA, who should have ERA accounts at all. in your particular records management organization. So it's a question, unfortunately, I can't answer. If you have an ERA account, the answer is probably this is your level. If you don't have an ERA account, the answer is probably maybe not. But you may be asked, if those are your records, by the folks who do have those ERA accounts and who do propose these, have the roles to propose these to the National Archives. This might give you some insight into what your senior records officers are asking you about the records that are included in these transfer requests. This is transfer details. There is hope. This is the second longest tab. All right. At the top, we have something easy. The very top section of the transfer details tab, the system simply repeats exactly what's in the transfer group description. You may have chosen in the previous tab where we've already loaded series description information from ARCUS and charge code description information if you're from ARCUS. If you are a stratified billing customer, we've already put that in there for you. If there is additional information about those records that you feel is important that you need to convey to the archives, that's the place to put it. That's a big field. It's a free text field. If there's a limit to how big it is, I don't suggest you try to put War and Peace in it. I don't know what it is. It's a pretty big field. All this does is repeat what has been saved or what appears in the transfer group description on the previous tab. So that you don't have to worry about, except you may notice at the top, it may need a little editing. You can do it. You can't edit it on this tab. On the General Information tab, you can. Underneath, there is a date field called cutoff. It is redundant. You can ignore it. Please ignore it. Do not go to any trouble for this field. If I could make it magically disappear from the TR today, then I would do that. But unfortunately, I do not have those magic powers. The next date field, just to the right of it, the transfer group disposition date, is important. These are the dates that we are using to determine which transfers in ARCUS are going to go into that particular annual move. It's all based on the disposition date in ARCUS. The vast majority of these will be eligible for legal transfer on the 1st of January of 2016 in this particular load, in the 2016 load. It is perfectly fine. We loaded them on the 1st of October for you. Many of those won't actually be eligible until the 1st of January in the coming calendar year. That's all. That's okay. You can go ahead and propose them. The archival units can evaluate them. They can move forward to approve them. No records are actually going to be moved before the 1st of January. So that actually 3-month or more space, since all the agencies had kind of early candidate lists already, to decide whether or not all the information is correct and whether you're in position to propose this or not. So don't worry about the fact that that is 3 months in the future or 2 months in the future when you're reviewing this. Now, if it's 5 years in the future, you need to get in touch with us because something has gone wrong. Also displayed on this are current physical location of records and the destination physical location of records. It's an awfully complicated way of simply saying, what federal records center are they sitting in now, and what archival unit are they supposed to be going to? Okay? We do ask that you do not change this information unless you have specific information that transfer XYZ has been moved from the Federal Records Center in Lenexa to the Federal Records Center in Seattle. And even then, we don't want you to change it. You need to be in touch with us or the FRCs involved. Please don't change this information. We know where the records are at the time we've created the TRs, and we have already made a determination which we may tweak as time goes on, as we know more about the records, about what archival unit they are destined for. So let us work with those. Further down, same tab, we have a section about transfer method. For annual move records, they all exist in some kind of physical format. None of them are stored in the cloud at this time. There's certainly occasional conversations about FRCs doing something along those lines, but that has not happened yet. So all of these are physical records. Even if they're the handful of electronic records that are stored in the Federal Record Centers and are permanent, they are still on physical media. So our only two choices here are physical means electronic records on physical media or physical transfer of non-electronic records. Literally 99.9% of these transfers should have physical transfer of non-electronic records box checked. I think of the 12,000 plus, we may have had 3 to 5 that were electronic records on physical media, and we have noted those. After that, you will see physical media type. On the first tab, on the General Information tab, there was information about very general records types. Textual records. Again, the vast majority of these are paper textual records. They might, however, be textual records on microfilm. And in this particular example, you can see that we have indicated that this transfer is a single box of microfiche. They're textual records on microfiche. They might be cartographic records on microfiche. But the vast majority of them are indeed textual records on paper, but we do have a fair amount of other kinds of media. Special media may be indicated here as well, different kinds of microforms as well. You will see under container description, we have simply put in a note. The quantity indicated under quantity is simply the number of containers. If it is indeed a box of microfiche, neither you, the FRCs, nor anybody else wants to go through and count how many pieces of microfiche there are in that microfiche box. So we're saying we have one box. It might be a microfiche box. It might be some other thing. We've got a box of microfiche, and the quantity information is simply the number of containers, not the number of pieces, individual pieces of paper or anything else in that particular box. Under list of containers, a little further down, we get a little more specific about what kinds of containers we have. In this example, again, we're talking about a single container. We have entered that information in there for you. That's from ARCIS data. We have also indicated the container type. Once more, the vast majority of these transfers are stored in standard Federal Records Center cubic foot boxes. However, there are other types of boxes. There are tubes, there are bundles, there are flat boxes, there are fiche boxes, there are microfilm boxes. So there are a variety of possibilities, even though the vast majority of this stuff is going to be in standard FRC cartons. Do not worry about this container description. If you are doing a direct offer at some point and you have a non-standard container, you may need to indicate that this is an other container type, and in that case, you would need to describe the container and give the specific dimensions of the container. In this case, we're doing it for you. We have a standard container, and we have entered in the appropriate dimensions for that container. You don't have to overwrite it. You don't have to do anything. Again, don't mess with this unless you know there's something particularly wrong, and it's better to get in touch with us first. The system will indeed come up with a total container volume. It will take the dimensions of each of these containers and the number of the containers and do the math, which is a lovely thing. If the number of containers is changed, if the container type is changed, the system will redo the math. So you don't have to be concerned about this unless you are discovering that in our transfer request, we're indicating that there's a single box, and you think there are 5 boxes. That may be something that you want to check It may have been split or broken out in ARCUS or in the previous system, NARS 5. But if you don't believe that's the case, or you've confirmed that that's not the case with the FRC staff or with your ARCUS data, there may be something a little off on this. We may need to revise this to reflect that there are 5 boxes instead of 1. But the vast majority of the time, you will not be bothering this. These are the container numbers. These are box numbers. This is a 1-box transfer, and the box is numbered box 1. There are 1-box transfers, which are remnants or breakouts or splits or whatever. The single box number may be box 5 or 27 or 115. Okay? And now you are at the bottom of the second long and painful tab. Once more, I recommend that before you go to the next tab, please save. Contact information tab is fairly simple. One of the things that Tim mentioned earlier about this, the transferring agency official is usually the first person, or a person with that role is usually the first user to open these transfer requests. That user's ERA profile information, name, title, email address, telephone number, will be supplied from the user's profile, if you're the person opening this, from your ERA user's profile into this section, so you don't have to type all that. If it is incorrect, you have the option, by the way, at the very top of your ERA screen, there is there's a link where you can go into your own user profile and update your title, or if your email address has changed, or if your phone number has changed, you can update those things in there. I think your agency is fairly stable. If you open this and you're not the right person and save it, your information is going to go in here. And the transferring official for your agency that's supposed to be reviewing this, their information will not fill in. Yours will stay here. This is why we're asking you, if you are not the transferring official for this particular transfer request, please don't go in and sort of putter around in these things and then save them, because your information will basically be in the way of the information autofilling for the transferring official ERA user. When the agency approving official, who might actually be the same individual with multiple roles, very common, gets to the point of making an approval decision on this and submitting it to the National Archives, their user profile information will fill in this section as well. This NARA contact, don't worry about this. If you are doing a direct offer and you've got somebody that you're working closely with at NARA and you want to put their information in here, fine. But for annual move type material, this is not going to get this to anybody any faster. Okay? You really don't need to put any information in there. At the bottom of this same tab, where what we have displayed is transferring agency official when that person does their work, the agency approving official when that person does their work, you're going to leave the NARA contact blank. Underneath that, there's space for other contacts. Actually, you can use the add button right here to add additional pieces of information. If you really, really want NARA to know that such and such a person is the right person to contact when they're reviewing this, you may put additional information in here. But again, most of the time, they're going to go back to the transferring official and the agency approving official with their questions. Another thing we do not want you to bother, do not touch. This is an other contacts where we have installed or auto-loaded or loaded for you and us the information about what annual move this was, the date of the annual move, that it's an annual move. Here is a piece of information about the fact that this is a system-generated transfer request. That can be an important piece of information. This is the phone number of the ERA help desk. So if you're in the TR and something's gone really wonky and it keeps crashing or whatever, it won't save, you've got the ERA help desk phone number right in front of you, as well as their email address, okay? Do not bother this data. You use this data and we use this data in order to find, when we're searching, way back to the beginning of our conversation, in ERA, to find a specific annual move. If you take this out, it disappears from our search results. It disappears from your search results when we're looking for a specific annual move, okay? We put this in here to be helpful, but we also put it here for the specific reason of making sure that everybody at NARA and everybody in your agency can find transfer requests associated with a specific annual move very easily by a very simple search criteria, okay? So leave this one alone. That's all you have to do in the other contacts. Basically, all of this fills in for you, okay? You basically don't have to do anything. Next tab is an information tab. Again, it doesn't require really any interaction on your part. It's the signatory information tab. It will show you the date that this particular transfer request was created by NARA in ERA on your behalf, all right? Each action taken on it, other than just saving drafts, you don't want that to pop up as a signatory because that's not a signatory action. Each signatory action, the transferring official submitting this to the agency approving official, again, even if that's the same person, the agency approving official proposing it to the National Archives, the National Archives archival staff approving the transfer or rejecting the transfer, as happens occasionally if there's stuff that needs to be corrected. As this transfer request moves through the process, other actions taken by NARA staff on this transfer request will be recorded here. So if you're interested in seeing what's happening with a group of transfer requests, you can search at various, a variety of search strategies you can do there. And if you want more information about that, we can talk specifically. But this is going to show you for a specific TR all of the actual actions, other than saving drafts, that were taken on this transfer request. Okay? Again, nothing you have to do to that piece. The next tab is related assets. At the point at which this transfer request is proposed to the National Archives, I believe that's the point at which it happens, the related disposition authority, ERA disposition authority, will be listed here. So up to the point until it is proposed to the National Archives, there will probably not be anything in related assets. Eventually, there will be a link to the disposition authority, the DAA or the DAL in ERA, and a link to the transfer processing results form, which is a form that is used by NARA archival staff to evaluate and work their internal processes and track their internal processes as they move this transfer request through the accessioning process. So don't expect to see anything in a draft, anything submitted for agency action, or anything prior to the time that it's proposed to the National Archives in this tab. The final tab, attachments. You may use this attachments tab for additional documentation. As I mentioned earlier, you don't have to put a copy of the SORN, the Privacy Act notice itself. If you really want to, nobody's going to prevent you from doing it, but it's not required. The other thing that is not necessary for you to do, especially if you are in the D.C. area, The standard forms 135 and the accompanying box lists for permanent records that are that your agency has submitted to the Federal Record Centers, that information will be passed from the FRCs to the archival units without you having to do anything. That will be taken care of for you, so you don't need to go looking for box lists or anything like that for transfers that are coming from the FRCs to the archival unit. There may be a few exceptions to that. Once in a while, the archival units may come back to you and say, we do need a little bit of additional information on this, and we'll ask you for that. But by and large, if you are a non-U.S. court federal agency, you do not need to attach a box list. Whoa, one more thing about this attachment business. You literally, can use the browse button to go into your own PC, attach whatever you need to attach. The thing that you do need to attach, if these are classified or formally classified records, is the NA Form 14130, the Classified Records Checklist. That is a requirement that you attach to the transfer request, each transfer request, which is indicated to have classified records in it. And when you browse, you choose, you attach, then you need to come down to that little red button. Well, it's not. It's circled in red here, box in red, and click refresh. And that will pull the names of the files that you have attached up into the file description box. You do need to click refresh once you've made your attachments so that you can see them here. Unfortunately, you will not be able to open them again from this particular point. So do be careful that you are attaching the correct item. The vast majority of federal agencies who are not U.S. courts are not required to attach a box list to a transfer request if it's coming from a Federal Record Center. U.S. courts are kind of a special case in this matter because by and large they have not been submitting box lists in the past. But the documentation that the FRCs already have is going to be provided to the archival units without any intervention or special effort on the part of the agencies. If there is something that the archival unit needs in addition to that, they will contact the agency.
TRs from the FRC already have generally, and he put that in parentheses.
Are we talking about, we're probably talking about the documentation, the standard forms 135, and the box lists that have been required to be submitted to the Federal Record Centers with the 135s for permanent records since 1991. Beginning in 1991, agencies were required to provide a folder title list to the Federal Record Centers when they retired for storage, permanent records for storage to the Federal Record Centers, along with the standard form 135, which is a transmittal form. Those pieces of documentation are what's going to be sent from the FRCs or provided or moved. Documentation will come from the FRCs and the archival units will receive it. If, for some reason, that does not answer all the questions that the archival unit needs to have answered about the contents, box lists, etc., so on and so forth, the archival unit should get back to the agency. I'm going to hand it back over to Tim. We've managed to get through all 6 tabs of the transfer request itself, primarily concerned with updating and validating and making sure the information is correct on the first 2 tabs, general information and transfer details, and that for classified records, the classified records checklist has been attached. And if all of those things are all good, Sam, what happens next?
Okay, thanks, Lynn. So at this point, once the transfer form has been reviewed and updated, it may now be submitted to the next stage in the process. Now, it's important to note that in submitting transfer forms to NARA, there is a two-submit process, sort of a dual submit process. The forms will first be submitted to an agency approving official, and then second be submitted to the National Archives. So it's important to bear in mind when submitting transfer forms to NARA, there's a two-submit process. So as I described this, if forms are submitted through to just the first submit, they may not have reached NARA, and I will point this out again momentarily. So in order to submit form, there is a pick list at the top of the screen, which can be updated to select submit. The pick list should be updated to submit, and the Go button needs to be selected. In doing this, the transfer request is submitted for approval to the agency approving official. Again, this is an internal submit within your agency, not a submit to the National Archives. As Lynn noted previously, it's important to save the transfer request periodically to ensure your information saves, and I would encourage individuals to save the transfer request before submitting to the next stage. It's also important to note that this step in the process does need to happen individually for each form that's being submitted through to the next stage of the process, eventually submitted to the National Archives. I will in a moment describe sort of an en masse, a bulk submit process, but that does not apply to this particular stage. And that is in part because the forms will have just undergone a review and update process individually, one by one, as Lynn just described. So this is the process for the first submit, and it's an internal submit to your agency, and this submits the form to the agency approving official. The agency approving official may propose the transfer request for approval by the National Archives. I will describe that process momentarily. The ERA will provide a task notification indicating that action needs to be taken on a particular transfer request, and an agency approving official may also reject a transfer request, which will then return to draft status. Agency approving officials may have the transferring agency official role, and that is sort of scenario we see in many agencies, whereby the individual that has the role for submitting forms to NARA also has the role for submitting forms to draft status. If that is the case, this two-submit process that I'm describing still does need to occur. So once the form is submitted for agency approval status, the agency approving official can search for the form using the search screen, advanced search screen that was described earlier, and the process is very similar. In fact, it's virtually unchanged, except that the status of the form has been updated from draft to submitted for agency approval status. So the agency approving official may search for TRs in the submitted for agency approval status, or set their user profiles to receive a task notification or email indicating that actions need to be taken on a particular transfer request. System-generated notifications are an option for agency users. However, that may be something that would facilitate and help workflow in certain situations, but I would also caution that there are instances where the high volume of transfer requests, as Lynn described earlier, there are some agencies with hundreds or thousands of transfer forms. The high volume may result in system notifications automatically generated by email, which may actually flood your inbox. So that's something to keep in mind and consider case by case. It may be a system-generated notification can be a great resource, a great benefit for your agency. It may also be something that you would elect to turn off. It really depends on your internal records management structure, and it would depend on the agency. So once the form is, once the agency approving official searches for the forms which are submitted for agency approval status, a list of forms in that status will populate, just as described earlier, for forms that were searched in draft status, and the agency approving official may select the form, can at that point review the form. Many of the fields that were editable while the form was in draft status are now sort of locked and no longer editable. At that point, once the form is reviewed, the form may be submitted to the National Archives through the same process just described, going to the pick list, highlighted in red, selecting the submit or reject, if appropriate, for returning the form to draft status and returning the form to the transferring official that was working with it. But if submitting to NARA, selecting the submit button and go. At that point, the terms of agreement will appear on the screen, and this is the terms of agreement that were applied to the SF-258. This is one of the elements from the SF-258 which remains virtually unchanged. There was a few copy-added elements updating SF-258 to transfer requests, things like that. But otherwise, the terms of agreement and function and purpose remains unchanged from the SF-258. And that box appears on the screen. Next step would be to review the terms of agreement, select the checkbox, click Continue, and then Go. So at that point, the status of the transfer request updates to proposed, and the form has been submitted to the National Archives in the ERA system. In addition to, or as an alternative to submitting the agency approving official to submit each of the transfer forms sort of one by one, another option which may be utilized really for any transfer activity, but may be especially helpful in workflow management for the annual move because of the sheer number of transfer forms that are going through the process on a cyclical basis. Another option the agency approving official may utilize is what we refer to as the single action multiple object function, SAMO function. So basically what that means is that the agency approving official may elect to submit to NARA multiple transfer forms through an expedited process. And in effect, the agency approving official can search for multiple forms that are in that submitted for agency approval status, apply a filter to the forms that are ready for transfer to the National Archives, and then through a few keystrokes, submit all of those forms to NARA at the same time. Now, I mentioned earlier that when searching for transfer forms, one option is downloading transfer form information via a full download search results and also a brief search results. That is something that I would encourage individuals to utilize at this point if they're considering a single action multiple object and en masse submission, because that provides that would provide a spreadsheet of the transfer form content for each of the data elements, each of the fields that Lynn just went through, and would provide that in Excel for review purposes as an alternative to opening up each of the transfer forms individually, one by one. Now, if this sort of en masse bulk process is utilized, there is, to my knowledge, not any limit on the number of forms that can be submitted using this process. We've in the past seen scenarios where hundreds of forms have been processed through the next step in the ERA system using this process. So again, when searching for transfer forms and submitted for agency approval status, you'll see on the screen there is a filter which needs to be applied to submitted for agency approval status. And then from there, the user, the agency approving official, would select either specific transfer forms, which are ready for transfer to NARA, select all transfer forms, and that's all transfer forms in the search results, even if there are 10 pages of search results and they're not displayed on the screen. Select all search results on the page, or none. If you inadvertently select all and you meant to select 2 or 3, you can undo that by selecting none. So that would be the next step after filtering, selecting the specific transfer forms which are ready to transfer to NARA, and then selecting submit here, go, reviewing the terms of agreement checkbox, or rather reviewing the terms of agreement and selecting the checkbox which was displayed on the screen a moment ago, clicking continue and go. And that terms of agreement in this case would, that terms of agreement box would show up once, would appear once on the screen rather than for each of the forms they're under. So again, the SAMO, the mass action, that is a tool that's available for transfer forms that are submitted for agency approval status, which may be utilized to expedite workflow. That's a decision that agencies would make based on internal review processes. But it is something that's available should there be an interest in utilizing it. I would caution, though, that it is an en masse option. And so reviewing transfer form by transfer form review is needed, it may not be appropriate for your agency. Similarly, if a review of content is needed, utilizing those full download and brief download options, exporting information to Excel can provide some level of review where appropriate. So at that point, the transfer forms have gone through that 2 submit process, the first submit from draft to submitted for agency approval, and then the second submit from submitted for agency approval status to proposed status. And at that point, the transfer forms and the records have been offered to the National Archives, and NARA's archival units will take the next step in reviewing transfer documentation, making approval decisions, and continuing to work through the sequence of events Lynn touched on at the start of the presentation. I will hand it back to Lynn for an update on a recent NARA bulletin.
Okay. Before I talk about the relatively new NARA bulletin, I guess it's about a year or so now, I do want to remind you, since we're on the topic of finishing up on the topic of submitting transfer requests to NARA archival unit for review, is to remind you about the appropriate dates. Virtually everything we send you has these dates on it, so I thought I'd throw them into the mix. Keep in mind that for transfer requests that you wish to approve, you wish to propose to the National Archives for legal transfer, those need to be submitted to NARA for their consideration by the archival units by the 1st of December. So if you have transfer requests in the 2016 load that we just did on the 1st of October, those need to be proposed to NARA archival units by the 1st of December. In order for those to be considered in time for movement in the winter quarter, and by that I mean the January through March quarter, okay? You can submit those transfer requests after that, obviously. There is, I think, for every archival unit and FRC in the country, at least one subsequent move in the DC area. It's usually in the summer. and in order to make that deadline, you have to propose to the National Archives those transfer requests by the 1st of June in order for them to be considered for the summer move, quote unquote, which will occur in the January through September quarter. In other parts of the country, and especially in areas where the Record Center and the archival units are co-located in the same building, there may be interim, quote unquote, moves between those two time frames, but certainly in the D.C. area, this is a massive logistical undertaking as well as an intellectual one. So we do indeed need for you to submit those by the 1st of December in order for them to be considered for movement during the winter quarter, by the 1st of June in order for them to be considered for the summer move in July, September, and October. Now, we do have a relatively new NARA Bulletin. It's been out for over a year. This is NARA Bulletin 2014-05, Guidance on NARA Created Transfer Requests. This has been discussed at bridge meetings and NARA bulletins, and all of the information we've been discussing on the annual move basically in the last year or so is to remind folks that this is indeed NARA policy. This bulletin established an expiration date for NARA-created ERA transfer requests. These are the ones created by the National Archives on behalf of agencies, either as part of the bulk loads that we do each October for the annual move. They may have been created by NARA staff as a courtesy at various times, and it would even include very early ERA pilot transfer requests for our pilot agencies from way back. We were creating transfer requests on behalf of agencies as early as 2008, 2009. So it would include those two. All of these NARA-created transfer requests expire 15 months after their date of creation if they have not yet been submitted to NARA. This would include any transfer request in draft or submitted for agency approval statuses if they had never been proposed to the National Archives. Okay? For example, the 2016 transfer requests we loaded on the 1st of October this year, a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, I guess, maybe? No, not even that long. We took 2.5 weeks. Will expire at the beginning of calendar year 2017, which means they'll be 15 months old on the 1st of January in 2017, not fiscal year 17, calendar year 17. We are in the process of refining our technical approach to deleting old expired transfer requests over the number of years that we have been piloting and then actively using for quite some time now. ERA to legally transfer records to the National Archives. There are a number of unproposed drafts sloshing around, basically, in ERA. There are thousands of them, and we are looking to remove those from the system to make your work easier, our work easier as well. So we're looking forward to getting that accomplished, getting the older stuff out of there, out of your way, so that when you're doing your processing and looking at your workflow for current materials, then you will have not have to contend with expired, outdated transfer requests, which probably contain material that is also outdated. The older a transfer request becomes, the less likely it is that the data, the information on it, is still accurate. So this is sort of a cleanup job that's on our list for the next few weeks for the oldest ones, but this will be happening on a regular basis in future years. So keep in mind, you basically have 15 months to decide whether a particular set of transfer requests that were created on X date are going to be submitted by you to the National Archives. So, this is contact information. We've had a number of really good questions. Sounds to me that there are a number of people who have some fairly complex concerns, or maybe very specific concerns. If you have specific concerns or questions, either of the kind that you all have been asking, we really like that, but also about a specific transfer request, a specific FRC transfer, et cetera, we are encouraging you strongly to use the annual move mailbox. This has been extremely successful for us. It's annual.move@nara.gov. A number of people on the annual move coordinating group monitor that mailbox. It is much better than trying to send it to an individual who may be on leave, may have gone to another agency, et cetera, and so forth. So add this to your Rolodex. I don't guess people have Rolodexes anymore, but it's simple. We monitor it. We will get the information, the question, to the right people in NARA to try to get an answer for you. So use this particular information about reviewing TRs, the kind of complex questions we had about what's the status of trade secrets and what's their FOIA thing and confidential business information, et cetera. Some of this can get pretty detailed with access specialists. So we're looking forward to seeing that question in the annual move mailbox as well, plus any other follow-up questions you guys may have. We will, of course, take a few minutes in a minute to see about more questions in chat. These are resources. You guys all got the slides. So you've got information, you've got the hyperlinks, you may have to copy and paste them. These are our basic transferring records online lessons, 1 and 2, on archives.gov. 2 new sets of videos, the transferring records ERA video FAQs. I've mentioned 2 or 3 of them. I've already mentioned the approximately hour-long live boot camp that is now available on YouTube. And, of course, there's the ERA Agency User's Guide. It may look formidable, but it's easy to search. It's also full of links. There is one really good chapter that's not that long on transferring records. I think there's a page and a half on annual move specifically. It's worth your time to go and look at that and read the 20 to 25 pages in large type with screenshots on transferring records and using the annual move, or transferring records within the annual move. So don't be intimidated by the user manual. Use it. This is more information either on YouTube or, of course, there are links from it from archives.gov as well. On archives.gov, there is specific guidance and policy for accessioning records, legal transfer, to the National Archives in the Washington, D.C. area. That's the link there. That also has links, subsections in that, on that page, that web page, for transferring textual records, electronic records, and special media records. A lot of your questions can be answered right there. There are a number of things on NARA's YouTube channel that address such issues of an explanation of frozen and legal holds as they pertain to permanent records. There's one that talks about the classified records transfer checklist, which was done for us a while back, not that long ago, by a member of the National Declassification staff who is an expert in these areas. There is a YouTube on video, you want to call it, for webinars, on folder title lists. There's also one on access restrictions, the importance and impact of access restrictions on the transfer of permanent records to NARA. So use all of these resources, folks. More resources. Once more, the ERA homepage is at archives.gov, records management /ERA. That's where you're going to find all of the stuff, links to all of the stuff, the manual, the work aids, the online training, user tips, ERA basics, links to the YouTube videos, the new videos, etc. In addition, if you are new to ERA, here's more information. There's the link for getting started with ERA. Once more, the ERA Help Desk telephone number and their email address. They're extremely helpful. especially with technical matters. I occasionally get myself muddled up with concurrent logons, and so I have a fairly regular. I have them on speed dial myself, and I use ERA all the time. Oh, okay, unmess up my thing. Help me update my password. Everybody's passwords, including NARA staff passwords, expire every 90 days because that's the best security approach we can take. And you may also contact Kathy Westfelt, who is the ERA user adoption lead for the National Archives currently, and that is her email address. You may have a strong relationship with your appraisal archivist or your accessioning archivist, and if you do, they are also available for you to contact with questions. But once more, if you've got annual move questions, specific ones, general ones, email us at annual.move@nara.gov.
We hope that you found this video useful. For more information about the National Archives and Records Administration or questions about ERA, visit us at www.archives.gov.